So preparing for child custody and mediation can be really overwhelming, and that is understandable. It's an incredibly difficult process, and the stakes are incredibly high for all the parties. In this video, I'm going to guide you through the essential steps, and I'll share effective strategies to prepare for this crucial process. Okay, so the first step here is doing your own homework on both interests and emotions. So let me say a little bit about each of these. I'm going to actually start with emotions because a divorce and then child custody brings up all sorts of emotions for yourself. Depending on where you're at in the divorce process, right, they can be feelings of great pain, regret, failure, maybe also relief, some joy, some happiness, some hope. Some of those might all be mixed in together, along with anxiety, fear, and worry. And that's just about yourself. Then when you're thinking about your kids, right, all of those feelings might come in as well. And so I think it's really important as part of the preparation process to let yourself really experience and feel those emotions, and to really seriously consider speaking to a counselor or a therapist. And the reason why this matters is we know that the more you're aware of and feel and let yourself have the emotions, the easier it's going to be to separate that out from the assessment of your own substantive interests and needs in this negotiation around child custody. And the more you deny those emotions, the more you pretend they're not there, the more you avoid the pain or cast it aside, the more likely it's going to leak out in the negotiation or in the mediation. So once you've done this kind of emotional assessment, then think about what are the interests you have with respect to child custody and the needs you have, both in the short and the long term. And that may really change depending on where your kids are at and where you are at in terms of your interests relationally and also career-wise. And really write those interests and needs out. Secondly, as if that wasn't hard enough, you actually need to write out the interests and needs of your former spouse as well. Now, on a completely rational level, if you're just watching this video and you're not in the throes of a divorce, probably this makes a lot of sense. But if you are in the throes of this extremely tough process, the last thing you want to do is do an assessment of your spouse's interests because you're probably angry, sad, frustrated. And probably there's a chance that you might put some things down there that might be partially accurate or even wrong, right? If you put something down like, their interest is just to get everything they want. Their interest is to get as much as they possibly can. I mean, that may or may not be true, but they probably have at least some interests, especially around the children, that are shared, like to have their life be as stable as possible, or for them to be healthy and feel supported, or for the kids to be able to feel like there's always a parent there for them. Whatever it is, please spend the time to write those interests out, because if the mediation or the negotiation is to come to a good end, their interests are going to have to be met as well as yours. Third, think about what your children's interests might be, and particularly what might be best for them. Again, I want to encourage you to think about the short-term and the long-term interests of your kids. And part of the reason why is their needs will change over time, and it may even be the case that their reliance at different parts of their life on one or the other of the parents might also change. As you do this, I hope it will become evident that using your children as leverage or as a way to get revenge would almost certainly undermine what is best for the kids. As many of you know, Bruce Willis is no longer acting because he's suffering from a very rare disease. But when that disease was first announced, he and his former spouse, Demi Moore, came together with their kids. And one of the things we learned is that their divorce did not affect their kids' sense that they were loved by both parents and their ability to have a really good relationship with both parents. And I think that's because Bruce Willis and Demi Moore actually really put their kids' interests first. I contrast this with one of my very, very close friends whose parents got divorced when he was 13 years old. And it's very clear that in that divorce, he and his sister were really used as leverage. And the long-term effects of that were pretty damaging. My friend ultimately had to step in the role of a father at the age of 13 for his younger sister. And it led to all sorts of dysfunction and resentment. And to be honest, I don't even think his parents realized how much damage that did to them. And so really thinking about the long and short-term interests of your children is really important and might be the way that you and your spouse can join together to do something constructive. Fourth, before you go into that mediation, think through what are the kinds of triggers that your spouse might throw at you to make you emotional, to get you to react, and spend some time thinking about how you will handle them. This may be, again, a painful part of the preparation process, but I think taking the time to do that, in fact, I know taking the time to do that can reduce the likelihood that when that trigger is used, it throws the negotiation or mediation off the rails. The whole reason why you're in the mediation is to actually come up with a plan that works for you, works for your spouse, and works for your children. And so really preparing around these emotional triggers can be incredibly helpful. Fifth, and this one I think is really hard, by dint of the fact that you are going into the mediation, it means that you must go in with an attitude and openness to being flexible. In other words, mediation is not the process that's going to tell you you're right and they're wrong. Part of a mediation is needing to make some concessions, needing to show some flexibility. Now, here's the beauty of a mediation. A mediation also allows you to come up with creative outcomes, including some really creative child custody provisions, things a court wouldn't do. So go into that mediation with an openness to flexibility, but also an attitude to be creative and come up with some really good child custody and visitation provisions. Sixth and lastly, really understand what your BATNA is before you go into that mediation. So what is a BATNA? It's called your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So what this means with respect to a child custody mediation is understanding what would a court do if you do not reach an agreement. And when you're in that mediation, you should not agree to anything unless what's being offered you is better than, in this case, what a court might do. Similarly, you should not walk away from anything that is better than what a court might do. Now, of course, there's no certainty in what a court might do, but this is why getting really good legal counsel to understand at least the broad parameters of what a family court might do can help you decide whether to say yes in the mediation itself. And let's recap these 6 important steps in preparation for a child custody mediation. First, do your own hard work of assessing your own emotions and interests before you go into the mediation. Second, consider also the interests and needs of your former spouse. Third, and importantly, think hard about your own children's interests and what is in their best interests. Fourth, think about what are the triggers that might come up in this mediation and develop a plan for how you'll handle them so that you don't escalate or surrender. Fifth, remember that the beauty of mediation is that you can create value, but it also requires flexibility and a willingness to make concessions. And lastly, understand what your legal BATNA is, what your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is, and if what you get in the mediation is better than that, say yes, but if it's worse, walk away. So, speaking of walking away, watch this next video on what happens if you don't agree in mediation. And before you leave, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you don't miss new content here. Okay, keep watching. Don't leave this channel.